Hello everyone, welcome back to another video on the JayBee Milly channel. I am JayBee and today I'm going to be giving you a bit of a Velma breakdown slash theory video before next week's last two episodes of the series. So we have finished watching the new episodes that just came out, and so for all this isn't going to be going into really deep evidence, I do just want to break down the list of who I think are likely suspects and really seeing if they're likely or not out of a scale of 1 to 10, of course, 1 being it could be them because they're on the list, but at the end of the day it would be a complete curveball if it was them. And 10 is like, yeah, prime suspect stuff. So there will be spoilers, and I'm going to be trying my best to include some clips within this video. But again, like, this isn't going to be a definitive gotcha conclusion at the end of the video. But there are definitely some suspects that I think are more contenders than others. Let's start with Velma's dad.
I saw you eat a fry out of the vacuum cleaner last week, so spare me, I've had a long day.
So there's a lot of things that point me to the fact that it could be him. Clearly he doesn't seem to be much in love with Velma's mum, and I know that one of the first scenes that indicate that, maybe you can say that that is a bit of a shallow approach as you see that he hasn't got her anything for Christmas, but then when you think about how he dotes over Sophie and sees to her every will and need in terms of like taking on the Fred Jones case so that she can afford a new baby monitor, so there are a few things that make me think if that's how he expresses love, then surely that does say a lot about how he felt towards Velma's mum. So he could have potentially been looking for a way out of that, but then I kind of just find it a bit unlikely that he would wait so long to decide to settle down. But again, you never know, that's kind of here nor there. It's also important to note that the second victim, Krista, was found right outside his house. I find it utterly bizarre that no characters or there's not a sequence in episode 2 or 3 that really showed Velma and Velma's dad being interviewed or interrogated by the police, considering if it's in their bin, you would understand that maybe they're going to be the prime suspect, but you know, the show doesn't really take itself seriously, and that's why I'm not going to take this video too seriously either, because I want to try my best to get in the mindset of the show itself. Like, I'm not going to go into, oh, this means this and that means that, but narratively I do think they're going to take this in a certain direction, and I think they want us to think that Velma's dad is a top suspect, but let's break down if he really is or not. So when we see after that sequence where he's buying drugs, he also offers to help Velma pay Daphne the $500 in order to get her mum's cold case file back.
I'll give you the $500 for her file, if you help me prove Fred's innocent.
And if he had anything to do with it, you'd think he would actively try and discourage the search for Velma's mum all he can. And for all you can argue that that is the case, the fact that he would offer that money to get the cold case file, and then as you see later on he admits that because of that Jinkies sign he thinks that his wife is missing, it's a bit like, no, I really don't see it being him after that. Not at all, because if he did have something to do with it, why would he not just stick with the narrative, oh, she's gone, she's left, or, you know, she's passed away? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think the most damning piece of evidence against him being the killer comes with the latest episode, which shows that kind of fun chase sequence where it plays on the old Scooby-Doo style, but we do see that Velma's dad is present at the same time as the killer, which in that type of context, unless there's two of them, I think we can more or less exclude Velma's dad from this entirely. So in terms of it being him, I'm gonna rank him a 2 out of 10.
A churro?
Now he could be an accomplice or it could be a multiple villain deal, but if it's that one single villain, it would really baffle me if it was him. So the next suspect on my list is Sophie.
And you can start changing your personality to fit in and avoid prison!
Who of course is dating Velma's dad, and before the last 2 episodes came out, she was a heavy contender, like with Velma's dad, so those two I kind of think maybe were in it together. And let's start off by breaking down why. She is in fact the very first suspect that the show presents to us, because Norville then comes to Velma and is saying, well, I sent Brenda on this trip to Spooner's, and maybe we're trying to figure out why Spooner's is so popular despite it arguably not being that good. And so we then see Sophie under heavy suspicion, like how did she afford the camera? There's all types of things pointing towards that direction. And even if we could exclude her after episode 1, at least for the things that have been presented, with it not being Norville's camera, we still do get to see the point where the second victim is found outside the house that she lives in. So there's a lot, and I'm surprised that Velma didn't pick up on that either. There's a lot that I'm surprised about with this show, that if it was logical, they would have gone a certain way. But again, I'm just presenting my theories based on the show that we've got. Also, this was kind of glossed over in the batch last week, but Sophie is the one that installed a tracker on Velma's phone. And so if she is aware that Velma's, like she claims to be a detective, surely she would wait to pounce when Velma is out of the way, or when she knows that she's not going to get caught by Velma. Maybe, I mean, that doesn't take into account that possibly someone else would catch her. But then if she is aware of the underground mining system, that could also factor into things. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can go with about Sophie, but I do think that because, similarly to Velma's dad, we do see her at the same time as the killer present in that chase scene, or just before that chase scene, I think unless Sophie is an accomplice, we can also give her a 2 out of 10 in terms of probability as well, so very low down on the list. So I did have Fred on my list.
I have an illness!
And I did have some points against him. For example, he wants to prove himself to his father, but then a point against him is he can't cut the steak. However, he does mention he has well-documented anger issues, and Velma's mum did disappear underneath his house. But I think there's just so much that happened in terms of his genuine character growth, and the fact that he interacts with people just in a way that it just wouldn't be him unless he's got some type of split personality, or at least what this show perceives as split personality. I think Fred is 0 out of 10, so I'm going to remove him from my list of contenders. Now let's move on to Norville. Now Norville's an interesting one because I think he is the first suspect that we're going to talk about that's of the lineage of Edna Purdue, and we're going to get more onto that because there's a little bit of theories that I've got to do with Edna specifically, and so let's just put a pin in that. We'll talk about it briefly after, but I think it's going to become a lot more prominent as we get down the list. But let's break down Norville's character. So he's clearly very obsessed with Velma, to the point where we see him in the later episodes perhaps overlooking Gigi a bit more than he should do in order to impress Velma and to get in her good books. And so someone that obsessed and almost that one-eyed in terms of just purely locked on Velma, it's like he could go to a dangerous extent to see that through, potentially even maybe orchestrating this whole thing. Like maybe because the whole show's been a bit of a joke at the moment, maybe the joke's on the audience by the end of it. It's just, you know, Norville like, it's all fake. They were all in on it to give you a good mystery. You're welcome, and will you go out with me? Like, you know what I mean? It could be something stupid like that. So I'm not discounting that at all. So, I mean, Norville is a contender, even though he does have an alibi, because if anyone's going to orchestrate this, all fabricated, maybe the brains were just a special effect, I do see Norville as being the character that would do that. But if it isn't a special effect, even then, we see that, and I've tried to rewrite this in a better way, and I haven't been able to, but we do see at the start of episode 2 that Norville does have a big weapon, and he tries to sell that big weapon for some money. Actually, that sounds completely awful, but Norville has a big weapon, and we know that he knows how to use it, although maybe a bit incompetently, as he does slice that portrait that he made of him and Velma.
Velma's birthday gift!
So he has something that could be used as, I guess, a murder weapon, if you want to call it that. He's Edna Purdue's grandson, which we know that there's some brain experiments going on. He could have been brainwashed, and maybe there's like a sleeper agent lying dormant within him. So there's a few leading to Norville. I still find it a bit unlikely, but I'm going to give Norville a 3 out of 10. Now here's a big one. It's Fred's dad.
That lump has made a mockery of us.
Of course, played by Frank Welker. Now, we see Fred's dad is a big game hunter. and not to put any like political or emotional views across to anyone, but screw anyone that big game hunts. Clearly he doesn't have much of regard for life, so I kind of think that that definitely pluses one up him in my estimations automatically. He's also a bit annoyed when it seems that Fred's going to be found innocent in court, and when Fred starts to incriminate himself, he almost seems quite happy. So it is possible that he may want to like frame someone else for it, but I don't know. There's some weird theories that I did have in regards to Fred's dad, and it's that there's even throwaway lines, you know, when Fred says, Jones men always just bottle up their emotions until it explodes in a family vacation. And what other Jones men would Fred be referring to if not for his dad? So we know that for all Fred claims to have very clear anger issues, it seems like he may get that from his dad, and so if someone made Fred's dad angry, would he lash out? I think that's distinctly possible. But not only that, there's some jokes that we can break down as well when Fred says, my dad told me not to pay attention to any women over 35, so perhaps that indicates that Fred's dad himself likes younger women. Perhaps he was having an affair with some of the students and felt the need to silence them because he didn't want that to get out, because he's all about his reputation, preserving his reputation. So it could be that it was seen as a bad business move to be, I guess, seen having an affair, or to ruin the Jones family unit, or the image of it at least. So I think that is possible. But let's not forget, he purchased Edna Purdue's house. It's a nice house, it's a big house, so it's natural that someone like Fred's dad would want to buy one of the nicer houses in Crystal Cove. But are we saying maybe it's a bit too much of a coincidence that it was that particular house? It could be. But the one thing that I think is surrounding Fred's dad that I think makes it more likely than not, and it's kind of a bit of a shame to say, but it has nothing to do with the show itself, and it's more external factors. It's more what we've seen so far from the marketing, from the shock factor. And unfortunately, for all I don't agree that the race change from Velma is completely to do with identity politics, I do think the writing of the show has proved more than once that it's perfectly fine taking jabs at stereotypes and, I guess, pointing out the faults of rich white men specifically. And so I don't see the villain being a woman. I don't see the villain being a person of colour. Not in this narrative, not with these writers. I think it's definitely going to be a white male, and they want shock factor. They want people to speak about the series, maybe in a good way, maybe in an angry way, something that'll make headlines. So, does making Frank Welker, the legacy actor, the only returning actor, the main villain in this series, does that get headlines? I'm gonna say yes. Now, I wouldn't agree with that, because make a good mystery, don't just make something to make headlines. But if they do want to get a buzz around this, I would say making Frank Welker play the villain was perfect for what we've seen from the marketing so far. It will get people talking. And so I think Fred's dad is an 8 out of 10, and that's being cautious. I think I would happily bump that up to 9, 9.5, but I don't really know. And there's more evidence pointing to Fred's dad in the later episodes too. Nothing completely incriminating, but we do see that he's very heartless in terms of the pressure that he puts on Fred, you know, be the Fog King or don't come back. There's stuff like when Fred's mum comes to check in on him, Fred's dad is nowhere to be seen.
Can you help me find Fred? He's missing, and I know your people are great at tracking.
So he is suspiciously absent when we know that the culprit is actively going about his duty or about his way. And I'm going to use his with a little citation, but yeah, I think Fred's dad possibly 9 out of 10 in terms of, you know, culpability. So we're going back to back with main contenders now, and we're going to talk about Norville's mum.
Okay, well, buckle up, because things are about to get weird.
Who is very interesting, because I think that they're possibly a red herring, or maybe because the show lacks a bit of subtlety, it could just end up being them. So there's one that I'm really pulling at straws at, you know, there's there's not really much into this, but I do find it interesting that one of the other suspects that we're going to get onto a bit later, the thief, is seen stealing money. And we do know from Norville on his Norville Streams show that his mum's birthday is coming up and she's only asked for money this year, like it's unusual. That's a loose connection. I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but you could connect those dots if you absolutely wanted to. But there's some visual cues and I guess some soundtrack cues that we can see when it comes to Norville's mum. So when Velma and Norville leave that self-defense class, that seminar, to go to talk to Fred about Velma's mum, we see Norville's mum's eyes like kind of squinting and she looks a bit annoyed at them. You can say, yeah, she's a teacher, she's going to be annoyed at students leaving, but I do think that the soundtrack that accompanied that was a little bit more sinister than just that. And let's not forget, she also seemed extremely happy to see Daphne hurt Velma. Let's not forget as well, she's Edna Purdue's daughter. So, I think Norville's mum, more likely than not, has been transplanted in some way by Edna Purdue. I don't think it's a ghost, and I don't think it's a clear-cut villain. I think it will be either Fred's dad or a person, for instance, Norville's mum, but that has been implanted by Edna Purdue. I definitely think that whoever's going to be unmasked is going to have some Purdue brain in their head. So I guess put a pin in that, because again, it doesn't really fit with the show's narrative, but in terms of good mystery, or as good as the show could get by what it's presented so far, I think it's definitely going to be some Edna Purdue in the brain type situation, and I think Norville's mum is the top contender for that. She also was the person that proposed that it was the ghost of Edna Purdue behind it all, and if there's one thing you can take from Scooby-Doo Where Are You, and I'm thinking specifically about that snow ghost, the person that is there telling the gang about the monster, the mystery, presenting it as real, is often than not the one that's going to be unmasked because they're legitimizing the monster. Also, not only that, but there's a little bit of a clue from the later episodes that we've just seen, and that's that she actually went to the press with her story. And so I don't know what the motive behind that was. I guess, as you know, said, if she wants money for her birthday, I don't know how much head teachers get paid, but honestly, whenever I even think about school, in hindsight, I'm kind of like, whatever teachers are getting paid, it's not enough, because the amount of stress that must be involved, you know, my hat goes off to anyone working in the education system right now. So, could she possibly want a little bit of a payout from that story? Yeah, maybe. So, it could maybe be seen as just a little way to get money as opposed to legitimizing the ghost theory, but I don't know, I kind of still feel like Norville's mum going to the press kind of pluses her up one on the probability factor for me. So I think in terms of Norville's mum, if we're just talking about Norville's mum, I'd say 6 out of 10. But if you factor in the possibility of it being Norville's mum by way of or by control of Edna Purdue, I think it could be a good 7 out of 10. We have Norville's dad.
Here for a rogering, as we might say?
Who is, I don't know, I mean, I think out of all the characters we've broken down so far, I think he is the one that remains the most unchanged from the last batch to this batch. I think not much happens with his character or how he's been portrayed in the latest episodes. So I'm just going to present what we know about him. So of course he is the school counsellor, and I guess implicitly from that he does have perhaps more of a intimate look at the students' day-to-day life and their emotions over a lot of other people, you know, being in that role of pastoral care. So I think it is possible that maybe all the victims opened up to him about something that he may see as a threat, either to him or perhaps his wife. I can see his wife easily coercing him as he's been presented as some beta male into helping her along, into being her accomplice. So that's absolutely possible. But a thing that I also thought was interesting is until the latest episode, and we don't even see much in the way of this, I guess, but we never really see Daphne under much threat. It's always, going after the other girls, or I think even more so Velma in the latest episode. But we know from the self-defense scene that Daphne does have a weekly session with Norville's dad, consistently to talk about her feelings. So it's of course possible that by opening up about the other girl's mistreatment of people like Velma or something like that, maybe he's trying to either avenge Daphne or help Daphne, or maybe he's just actively avoiding her because he has an emotional connection, because she's the one that sees him and he doesn't want to cause her any harm from that level. But if you think about how he sees Norville, I think this is the one thing we take away from the latest episode. When Norville is crowned as the Fog King, it's kind of like you see Norville's dad tear up. So clearly Norville being in a position of confidence is very, is pleasing to him, which you'd expect from a father figure. But conversely then, does him being in a position of not belief, or being in a position where he's getting bullied or picked on or he's lonely, does that maybe drive Norville's dad to do the opposite? So could the girls have been opening up about rejecting Norville, and that's when he decides to... I don't know. I don't really see it, but I'm going to put it out there because it is, of course, possible. And again, it does fit in with that shock factor. Of course, it's the white man that's the villain. So, he's up there. I'm going to give him a 5 out of 10 just because I could see the show being so stupid that it goes that direction. But I kind of would be annoyed if it did do that, because I think for all, the show hasn't proven to be better than that. I think it would be the easiest way out, which I don't see even this show taking. I think this show maybe doesn't get as much credit as it deserves for when it does have serious moments. I think the issue is just the serious moments are surrounded by endless jokes and attempts at skits, and not all of them land. In fact, I think only a few times they land for me. So yeah, that's kind of a neutral ground for Norville's dad. And moving on to our next member of Mystery Inc., because I have factored some of them in. Of course, you know that we've discluded Fred from all these, quote, investigations. But Daphne is another one that I've pretty much discounted at the end of this.
Oh, just the usual. Zoinks, Jeepers, Mystery Machine, and of course, Ganja.
I did think there are a few things going for her noticeably. She clearly has deep feelings for Velma and even proves to want to make Velma jealous, so she doesn't have an issue being a little bit vindictive in her pursuit of Velma. So it could be that we know she carries a knife, we know that the other girls are kind of mean to Velma, so potentially she wants to get them out of the way to remove the social pressure for her being seen like she's settling for Velma, but also just the stigmatism that they hurt the person I'm in love with, therefore they have to go, that type of angle, which wouldn't be a far cry from this version of Daphne at all, considering what she does in the self-defense class, what she does in the flashbacks. It's all kind of building up as a bit of a crazed Daphne, I think that's fair to say. We also know that she may be banking on Velma not figuring that out, because she is distinctly aware of Velma's hallucinations, because by her own admission, one of the first ones happened at Daphne's house. But I think because she has the alibi in the latest episodes of being seen with the killer, that I think we can assume that it isn't Daphne. So I'm going to put Daphne as a 1 out of 10. But bear in mind, if it is going my views with Norville, where maybe she orchestrated it all to make Velma feel better, if we're going that route, maybe a bit more, but I really hope it doesn't do that. And let's not forget that Daphne only found out about the main method of transportation for the killer in episode 5. So unless she was lying to the audience whilst only she was on screen, I think it's more or less impossible that it can be Daphne. But speaking about those underground sewer lines, the cave lines, there's a few people that we know absolutely knew about the cave lines, and that is of course Daphne's parents. Now, starting with Daphne's dad,
crystals are a hoax, Daphne, like vitamins.
Or internships.
I think he's clearly more in the firing line of suspicion, more so than Daphne's mum. But with Daphne's dad, we see that he's aware of the drains. He has used them before and gotten away with it, from when he threw the geode through the window. Now, clearly it would take longer to maybe target someone and to kind of murder them versus here's a rock, let's chuck it, clearly. But he even did that very quickly in my estimation. So in Among Us style, he could easily just pop up from the vents, do his thing, and then pop down again. But I think motive is the thing. Like, why would he do that? What would he gain from it? But then we see Brenda's top in his possession. So I don't know. I really don't know what to say about that. He's heartless because he pulls the gun on Daphne. I don't know. I don't know what we say about him. He's in custody, but we have seen that people have escaped. So I'm maybe going to give him more of a neutral stance. I'm going to give Daphne's dad a 5 out of 10. Now let's talk about Daphne's mom. Because Daphne's dad does say that it's Daphne's mum that found Brenda's top. We also know that Daphne's mum escaped from custody only to be confronted by the killer, but then we don't see her brain in the cave with Fred. So either that leads to the killer completely changing his MO, or it was that she knew the killer and that's why she wasn't there, because she just wasn't killed by the killer, because they're in cahoots. So I think it doesn't discount her at all, the end sequence there. So I'm going to give her equally maybe a 6 out of 10. Okay, this is probably the person that's shot up the most in my suspicions, especially after the last 2 episodes. I think everyone else more or less has stayed the same, if not completely discounted. But Gigi is a character that I am very suspicious of now.
Hi.
So let's look at what she's done, at least before the last batch of episodes. We do know that someone is in the cave system listening to Daphne and Norville talk, yeah? And we know that that leads to, like, the whole conversation about that is about Norville wanting to find love, not feeling it with Velma. And the next sequence we get from that is Gigi kind of becoming more relatable. So you can attribute that to what happened in the episode. But if it was Gigi, because I don't think they've ever revealed who was listening, you can very much take that as, okay, Shaggy's shown vulnerability, he's my in-character, so I'm going to coincidentally orchestrate a way for me to bump into him. Because that was a coincidence, and of course, you know, it's a show, it's whatever. The coincidences like that are bound to happen narratively. But if you read it another way, the chances of 2 students bumping into each other like that, and it being those 2, is very unlikely. But honestly, that's all I had before the last 2 episodes, and that wasn't much of anything at all. So if you'd asked me this time last week, I was gonna probably give Gigi a 2 out of 10, but I think she's boosted up in a crazy way. So Gigi does not have an alibi when the killer shows up. She's one of the noticeable absences, and next time we see her, she's changed outfits. Not only this, but for all she has changed her style a bit, she is still one of the ones that was seen as a contender for people that would potentially be targeted. And when you think about it like that, why would the killer show up and completely ignore her? It doesn't make much sense at all unless she was connected to the killer in some way. So again, that pluses her up a bit. But this is the most damning piece of evidence for her. Gigi's cabin is right above the main base where the brains are. And I appreciate that with it being all about Crystal Cove and the underground area, technically you can make the argument that anyone's house could be above the mines in some ways, you know, by the sewer drains. But the fact that where Fred was held captive with the actual brains, which we haven't seen yet, is above Gigi's cabin in the middle of nowhere. Anywhere that base could have been, it happened to be on top of there. It's just too much to ignore. And if the end goal is to give us Mystery Inc., right? To give us the Mystery Inc. gang, who's the one spare part that's in that dynamic who we're not used to? It's Gigi. So I think narratively we're gonna see Gigi as a 7.5 out of 10 here. So this isn't really a suspect. I think this is more or less a given. But Edna Purdue herself,
I never should have been an organ donor.
I would be completely gobsmacked if one of these characters wasn't a transplanted brain of Edna Purdue. Her culpability in this kind of goes without saying. She's the one that developed the brain switching technology, and although she didn't really have the drive to use it to brainwash people or to get rid of the meddling kids as they're referred to as, she is the one that goes potentially crazy trying to figure it out. But again, we're hearing a lot about Edna Purdue. I'm saying that she's almost a given to be one of the contenders. But again, the narrative of the show, if women are seen as, I guess, mere victims of men, which is the show's stance, at least for the most part, there's another character who's been lingering behind the scenes of Edna Purdue that I think it could end up being. So for all we can, I'm going to put Edna Purdue as a 9 out of 10 story-wise. But again, context, and it's sad to say, but context is important, and I don't think this show gets away with not having a joke about that being, of course they did it. So, General Meede.
Army General Harry Meede, who felt he could use it to spy on what he believed to be the biggest threat to the American way of life.
We know that it was his initial plan to use the technology to stop meddling kids. And we also know that even without the technology, he's perfected hypnosis. So when we eventually get to Velma's mum, not knowing things, and almost it looks like she was snapping out of something when she was asked about who did this to her. It looks like hypnosis. And in fact, a lot of the characters that are acting suspiciously in this series, maybe this whole brain switching thing was a misnomer, was a bit of a red herring. And it could just be simple hypnosis from General Meede, who I think potentially has maybe transplanted his brain into someone else's just to survive for longer, because we saw that he was relatively middle age to old age-ish age, like definitely adult age back in, I think, when was it, the flashbacks, the 70s? So he would be getting on a bit now. It wouldn't surprise me if his main goal is ultimately some form of immortality, or at the very least he's adopted that at the moment so he lives longer to make sure that his plan goes through. I think, again, out of all of this, the logic is a bit nowhere, because why wait for now? Why strike now? Why make the killing so obvious? Why not just do it in secret? But they're making a spectacle of every one of them for some reason, and that's the part that I'm really struggling with. But General Meede, I'm going to give a 9.5 out of 10. I think he is a big contender for this. And as I've mentioned, Velma's mum, I think Velma's mum is largely innocent. I don't think it has much to do with her. But if we're talking about her potentially either getting brain switched or brain cohabitation or hypnotization, I think she ranks up as, an 8 or 9 out of 10, because she's been missing for years. She clearly loves Velma. I don't see her doing that voluntarily. So she's either been kept there under the brain control of someone or the hypnosis of someone. So for all I think she is actively involved, I don't think she was doing it from her own volition. So that's kind of my main stance. I do hope that you enjoyed this video. Sorry if it was a bit rambly, a bit out of nowhere, but I just kind of want to break down exactly who my top contenders are, just ahead of next week's last couple of episodes. So to break down my top 5 contenders, if I'm going to narrow it down to that, we have Fred's dad, we have Norville's mum, we have Gigi, we have Edna Purdue, and General Meede. They're my top 5. I wish that that the last 2 were weekly, because I kind of want to try and narrow it down to like top 3. But I think I'm happy enough with that top 5 list. If I'm right, I'm right. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. All you can do is speculate. So if you do want to see more, then please like, comment, and subscribe to JayBee Milly.